I'm Dr. Tony Cicoria. I'm an orthopedic surgeon, still practicing, and I grew up in upstate New York. I went to college at the Citadel at the behest of my father, who said, "Son, you can go to any college you want, but if you don't go to the Citadel, don't come home." I thought that made it pretty simple for me to make a decision about. And thankfully, I had a football scholarship that I was there on. And after I went to the Citadel, I wanted to be a research scientist and had the privilege of studying with the Woods Hole Lab in Massachusetts and got to meet Dr. Albert St. Georgi and worked in his lab for a short time. And then by the time I finished my PhD, I decided that I wanted to go to medical school. And so I chose to do that. And then after I was finished, um, orthopedic surgery seemed like a perfect fit for me because I was always one of those kids that liked to take everything apart and put it back together again. In 1994, third week in August, my wife had a party, which has every year for her family because there's so many people with birthdays in August. And so we would have a communal birthday party. This year, she decided to have it at the Sleepy Hollow Lake in Athens, New York. And it's a beautiful lake, and we had a pavilion that was rented right next to the lake. And in the morning, it seemed like it was a beautiful day. And I was given the job of being the barbecue chef. So I was outside running the barbecue while everybody else was running around. And there were about 25 people there with a ton of kids as well. I was out at the barbecue doing my job, and I remembered that I hadn't called my mother that day, who was quite elderly, and I wanted to take a break and give her a call. And so I had one of the other guys come over and watch the barbecue while I walked around the building, and there was a payphone on the other side of this pavilion. And I was standing at the payphone and I was trying to call my mom, and I, put in her number and let it ring 5 or 6 times, and she never picked up. And so I said, well, I'll try again later. What I was not aware of is that a huge thunderhead had formed over the lake, and it was completely unbeknownst to me. And when I had the phone next to my ear and I was starting to take it away to hang it up, suddenly I saw this huge flash of light comes out of the phone and hits me in the face, and I hear this incredibly loud crack. And it just threw me back like a rag doll. I went flying backwards and dropped the phone and just took off going backwards. And a strange thing happened as this was going on was I knew I had been hit by lightning. I saw it, I heard it, and I knew I'd been thrown backwards, but suddenly had this strange sensation of moving forwards. And I was very confused by it. And I remembered standing there going, I don't understand. I know I got hit. I know I got thrown back. And so why am I standing here and wondering what just happened? As I was standing there, all of a sudden, I hear my mother-in-law screaming, and she's at the top of the stairs. I'm at the bottom. And she starts running down the stairs right at me, and I thought, this can't be good. When your mother-in-law is screaming and running at you, something bad's going to happen. And as she was coming down the stairs, I realized that she's not looking at me. She's looking off to her left. And I thought, what the hell is going on? I look at the phone and the phone is dangling. And as she gets down to the right where I was, it was like I didn't exist. And she just took off to her left. And I thought, oh, I'm going to follow her. And as I took off to follow her, I went probably 3 or 4 steps. And all of a sudden, I was confronted with myself on the ground. And I remember looking down at this body and I thought, oh shit, I'm dead. And I remember my mind was racing like crazy at the time. And I'm thinking, wait a minute. I thought when you died, there'd be some bells and whistles or something would give you a clue that you were dead, but I had nothing. There was absolutely seamless. And the only thing I could think of was that when I had that sensation of moving forward as my body was going backwards, that was my spirit separating from the body. And so here I am standing there. I'm right at the head of this body, and I'm looking down and realizing that I'm dead. I'm not in that body, and I get this sudden realization that, Jesus, I'm thinking just like I normally would. I'm thinking in the same vernacular that I would normally think, and it came to me that whoever I am, I always am. And this body is nothing but an empty shell that my spirit spent some time in. But now I'm off on my own. And I realized that there is no death, that our spirit just continues on. The moment we leave the earthly body, we move to the next phase. And I remember looking around, and there was a woman who was standing behind me waiting to use the phone. She was there with her 12 or 13-year-old daughter. And it turns out that she was a nurse. And she ran over to me, and got down on the floor, and she was going to start CPR, which in retrospect, I thought was really kind of interesting, for a number of reasons. One, when a bolt of lightning strikes something, it loses some of its voltage and amperage. And so it had to lose enough that it didn't turn me into a French fry as it hit me, but it had to be enough to stop my heart and kill me. And so just to be on the safe side, whoever was in charge of running this event from a spiritual standpoint wanted to make sure that there was a safety valve. So they had this nurse standing behind me. So just in case I got a little too much, she would be there to save the day. And that thought really kind of stuck with me as time went on. And so she starts doing CPR and everybody's crowding around. And at this point, I'm thinking, well, there's no point in standing here. I can see that what's happening. I know what's happening. And I wanted to go check on my family. And so I turned around and walked away. And I walked over to the stairs and I started going up the stairs. And I get to about the 3rd step. And all of a sudden I realized that my legs are starting to dissolve. And I thought, holy crap, what is happening? And as I was going up the stairs, my form dissolved. I was nothing more than a ball of energy. By the time I got to the top of the stairs, that's all I was. And at that point, I thought, well, the stairs go off to the left to make the second transition. And I said, the heck with this. I just went right through the wall. And when I got through the other side of that wall, my wife was sitting on a chair and she was painting children's faces. She had no idea what had happened. And I made a specific note to myself of who the kids were and what position they were in, the position of the chairs and tables. And I don't know why I made a specific point of memorizing that, but it would turn out to be an important factor later on when it came time to check notes and see what I really witnessed, that there was no possible way for me to have witnessed. And I continued, and I went diagonally through that room, and I had the realization that, my family would be fine without me. And as I got to the roof line, I went through the roof, and things really started to change at that point. Suddenly, I'm falling into a river of pure positive energy. It was the most unbelievable thing I've ever felt. If you could imagine absolute love and absolute peace, that's all you felt in this energy. And I could see where the energy was coming from. I looked off to my right and it looked like a globe of sorts that was radiating this energy. And the energy went through everything and actually composed everything. And I could actually see the lines of the energy, and it looked like a sine wave. Um, and my science brain started to kick in and say, "Well, you could measure this." And I'm like, "Okay, but who cares?" Um, but as I was feeling this and came to this realization, this is the greatest thing that could ever happen to somebody. I mean, dying is one thing, but being able to die and experience this is unbelievable. And to come back with it and have that knowledge of what this actually means. So this river of pure positive energy is carrying me someplace, and I didn't care where it was going because it felt so amazingly great. I remember thinking this must be the God energy that I'm feeling, and I'm seeing it. It flowed through everything and it was all connected. And I realized that we're all part of this same energy force and we are all connected. At this point I'm excited about what I'm feeling. It was such an incredible feeling, and so I'm floating in this river of pure positive energy. And I have this is a moment where I see this collage of high points and low points of my life, almost like you're seeing it on a wall, and they're all individual pictures. And there was no big in-depth life review. It was just, this is the collage of your life. And I thought, okay. And I just kept going wherever I was being taken. And I was resigned to the fact that I was not going to see my family again. I was off on a new adventure. And so I reached a point where I'm ecstatic about where it's taking me, although I had no idea where it was going. I was so excited about it. And all of a sudden, boom, I was back in my body. It was like somebody had flipped a switch, and I was pissed. I remember lying there going, "No, I don't want to come back. Don't make me do this. I loved where I was going. I want to complete that." But I was just given the intuition that it's not my decision and you're back. And I remembered I'm lying there in this body now, and my face had a burn on it where the lightning hit me, and when it came out my foot, and they both hurt like crazy. I didn't want to go from absolute bliss to absolute pain. What kind of a crazy person wants to have that? But I was back. And the lady who had been doing CPR had stopped, and she was just kneeling next to me. And it took about 15 minutes for me to wake up enough that I could say anything. And the first thing I said was, I looked at her and I said, "It's okay. I'm a doctor." She just laughed and said, "You weren't a minute ago." And I was embarrassed. And so I just kept my mouth shut because I knew the circuits weren't working right. And at this point, the police came and they called an ambulance, and I refused to go to the hospital because as a physician, I know what going to the emergency room is going to mean. I'm going to sit there for hours and hours, and they're going to tell me, "Yeah, you're alive, go home." So I didn't want to do that. So I said, asked my family to take me home, and I went home and I saw my physicians, and they said I was okay, and they cleared me to go back to work. And I was absolutely mystified by what had happened and what it meant. And obviously, the first big lesson that I took away from it was that our spirit lives on. It doesn't die when our body does. To know that there is something else that occurs after death is the greatest gift that anyone could ever give me. And to know that there is a force of absolute love and peace that underlies everything and makes up everything is one of the most valuable pieces of information that I could have ever gotten, especially moving forward with my life. I did not tell anybody about what actually happened. Everybody seemed to know that I had been hit by lightning and had a cardiac arrest, but I did not publicize that I had an out of body and near death experience because this was the mid 90s. And if you started talking about, oh, geez, I had an out of body experience and I saw God's energy and I experienced all these things, somebody would call the state and say, you need to take this guy's license away because he's a lunatic. And so that was a fear. And because of that, I only told very select group of people that I trusted who would not say anything. And so it became my little closet secret, so to speak. I think one of the really important things from all of this incredible episode to take away are that there is no death. When we die, it's just a change. It's a phase change. We enter into a different state, but our spirit lives on. Do we come back and reincarnate and do something else? I believe we do. And I think that that's the whole purpose. We're here for spiritual growth. The ultimate goal is to be able to join with the source of everything. And I think that one of the ways that we can ensure that that happens is to lead a good life in terms of there's only two pathways that you can take. You can take service to others or service to self. And service to others is a spiritual growth pathway that enables you to become one with the source. Eventually, all spirits will make that realization. So the big lesson there is no death, and your spirit continues on and is everlasting. And that there are pathways for you to join the source or God, however you want to call it. But it is real, and it is the feeling of love and peace emanating from this source is unbelievable. So I went home, and it took about a week for the fog to lift out of my brain. And then within that week, all of that disappeared. And I remembered this overwhelming thought of, well, what did this mean? How did I go through this whole episode and nothing has really changed, and I'm going to go back to work in this next week. But what I didn't realize that I was changed, and it would come out within a short period of time. And the first thing that I noticed was that I had this insatiable desire to hear classical piano music, which was a big departure for me. I was a kid of the 60s. I liked rock and roll, and there really wasn't much of anything else. My mother had made me study piano for a year when I was 7 years old, and I dutifully did that under life threat. And at the end of the year, I decided I'm not going to do this again. So I went off and did other things. And that was okay with them. But at this moment, I'm suddenly having this epiphany that I have to listen to classical piano music. And it was such a strong feeling that I was driven to actually go to a music store that had classical CDs, and the only place around was in Albany. I actually had to drive an hour to get to it. And when I went into the store, a CD of Vladimir Ashkenazy, a famous Russian pianist, literally jumped off the stand into my hands. I thought, okay, this is obviously something I'm supposed to have. So I buy this CD, and it's him playing his favorite Chopin. And I listened to it nonstop. I could not stop listening. I made everyone else listen. I made the people at work listen. I made my family listen. I became obsessed with it. And there came a point when I suddenly realized that it's not going to be enough to listen to this music. I need to be able to play it, which was a big problem since I didn't have a piano. I didn't really know how to play. Um, and, how was I going to be able to do that? And the next day, one of our babysitters came by and she said, I'm going to be moving, and I have this old upright piano that I love, and I was wondering if I could store it at your house for a year. Now, she didn't know anything about the lightning incident, but out of the blue, she's offering to let me use her piano. And so we said, sure. And that very week that the piano shows up, I have a dream. And in this dream, I'm walking out onto a stage of a big theater, and I'm giving a concert, a piano concert. And I remember as I walked out there, I looked at this venue of a theater and made specific notes about it. And I have not seen that yet. Hopefully, I'll see it before I pass. But I was out at the front of the stage and giving a concert, and I'm out there giving the concert, but then I'm walking out in this dream. I'm walking up behind myself, and as I'm walking toward myself, I'm listening to this music, and I'm listening to what's being played, and I say to myself, this is not somebody else's music. This is mine. And I stood behind myself, and I was watching the music and listening to it. And it had a loud crashing ending. And I woke up from the dream, and it's 3:15 in the morning, and I sat up on the edge of the bed, and And I look around and I'm like, whoa, that was really crazy. And I get up and I go to the piano and I try to plunk out different notes on the piano, but I don't have any idea what I'm doing. So I said, to hell with this. And I'm going back to bed. So I went back to bed. And that morning when I got up, I went on with my usual business. But the thing that was different was that the music from that dream started playing in my head, and it would play all day long. And especially when I went and sat down at the piano to try to learn how to play something, it would start playing in my head exactly the way it was in the dream. And I went to the store and bought some music books to try to teach myself how to play. So I started trying to teach myself how to play, and I was actually making some progress. And one day, my daughter's best friend Jackie Cypress was over at the house, and her mom is an accomplished professional violinist. And I was in on the piano and I was trying to teach myself a piece of music called a Fantasy Impromptu. It's a Chopin piece. And I could not play it. And I could not understand why the two hands don't line up for this piece of music. I'd never seen that before. And she hears me on the piano and I'm banging on this thing trying to get it to make sense to me. And she walks over and she says, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm trying to learn this piece of music, but the hands don't line up. I don't understand it." And she said, "They're not supposed to." And I said, "Why would somebody write a piece of music where the hands don't line up? How can you play that?" And she said, "It's what's called a polyrhythm." And I said, "What's a polyrhythm?" And she said, "I'm not even going to try to explain that to you. You need a teacher." And I started taking piano lessons with the head of the music department at Hartwick College. Her name was Sandy McCain. And I had told Sandy the story of what had happened and wanted to know if she would take me on as a student. And she agreed that if I brought 3 pieces of music to her studio and could show her what I was interested in doing, she would consider it. And so I had an interview with her, and she said, "Yeah, I'll take you on as a student, but under one condition. You're not allowed to play any of these pieces of music that you're trying to learn until I say you can. You've already picked up a lot of bad habits, and we need to start over from the beginning." And so she did. I had to start at the very beginning and evolve in the process. One of the things that occurred as this was all going on was the music from the dream was always present. And if I didn't pay attention to it, it would become more insistent. And so I learned very quickly that I needed to pay attention to the music. And as I was learning how to play, I would try to play some of the piece from the dream. And occasionally I would write down little pieces of that music on sheets of paper and threw it in a drawer thinking someday I'll come back to this. Um, and I continued on this process. And then in 2002, so this is the Lightning was in 1994. Now it's 2002. I started going to a piano camp for adults called Sonata in Bennington, Vermont. And this is a group of 30 people who would stay for a week in an old convent, and there was a piano in every room. And it was a wonderful experience because all these people were absolutely obsessed with piano, and I certainly was. And each time that you went, at the end of that week, you would have to perform a specific piece that you chose, and I would do that. And as time went on, in 2006, when I went, the owner's sister, her name was Erica Vanderlyn Feidner. Erica was the #1 piano salesperson at Steinway in New York City, and she was a concert pianist as well. And we got talking about my love for piano and the lightning and how it affected my life and how I had been given this music from a dream. And she said, there's only one person that could tell this story. And I said, okay, who's that? And she said, Oliver Sacks. And I said, well, I don't know Oliver. And the only thing I know about him is he wrote the book Awakenings. But he was a famous neurologist in New York City, and she was a good friend of his. And after the after the piano camp, I went home as usual, and the next month I get a phone call from Oliver Sacks. And I thought, holy crap, this is unbelievable. And Oliver says, I heard about this story from Erica, and I was wondering if I could get you to come to New York City to be interviewed. I'd like you to be one of my patients. I have a group of people who've had unusual events like this, and I'm compiling a book about all these stories. And I said, sure. And so we made it a point to get together in August of 2006, and I got to spend an incredible day with one of the most brilliant minds I'd ever met. And we spent the entire day talking about the lightning and what it meant and life and the way the brain works. And at the end of the day, we're saying goodbye at his door, and he looks at me dead in the eye and he says, the music from the dream went through an awful lot of trouble to get here. The least you can do is write it. And I was so taken with what he said. When I got home, the first thing I did was I went to a store and I bought a music writing program called Sibelius, um, essentially writing music for dummies. And what I did was I got a electronic keyboard and hooked it up to the computer, and I would play into that computer the music from the dream, and I would be able to get hard copy from that. So it took me about 7 months of working every night till I couldn't even see straight to do that. And my goal was I wanted to be able to play that music for my piano camp, which was going to be in May of 2007. So as time went along, I actually did complete writing that piece of music, and I call it the Lightning Sonata, but it's actually a different musical form. I got it down on paper, and I learned it so that I could play it for the group. So in May of 2007, I played my Lightning Sonata for my piano group, and it was well received. And while I was there that week, I got a call from Oliver. And Oliver says, I want to use your story in my book called Musicophilia, Tales of Music and the Brain. And I said, well, I don't have anything to hide. Sure, you can use it. He said, well, good, because you're chapter 1 and it's coming out in the New Yorker magazine July 23rd. And I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. You didn't tell me that part. And he said, it'll be fine. And so July 23rd comes around, and suddenly I'm in a New Yorker magazine, and the phone is ringing off the hook. And one of the first calls I got was from a friend of mine at the State University of New York in Oneonta, who's the head of the music department there, Carlton Clay. And Carlton calls me and says, I read this story in the New Yorker and I'd like to have you come and teach a class. And I thought, oh, that'd be fun. I'll do that. And then the next week he calls back and he says, geez, I'm getting an awful lot of calls about this whole event. He said, would you also play the music for the class? And I thought, sure, I could probably do that. And then I didn't hear anything for a short period of time. It must have been about a month. And he calls back again and he says, geez, he said, the interest in this story is really incredible. And he said, would you consider doing a concert? And I said, no. I said, I don't have the faintest idea how to do something like that. I'm not prepared for it. I don't think I can do it. And he talks me into it. And I called my piano teacher, Sandy, and I said, Sandy, I said, I got myself into a real jam here. And I said, what can you do to help me? And she said, well, I'll help you do it. She said, but you're going to have to spend 3 or 4 hours a day getting ready for this. And I said, okay, I'll do it. And so she would meet with me every day and we would go up to the performing arts theater at the State University. And she made me walk in, made me learn how to play the music in front of people. And we went through the whole thing from start to finish. And it took me a period of months to be able to do it. And I had agreed to doing a concert on January 29th of 2008, which was my birthday. And I thought, well, this would be an interesting new birth scenario. And about 3 or 4 weeks before this concert is supposed to take place, Carlton calls me again. And he says, I hate to do this to you. He said, but it's really gotten out of hand. And I said, what are you talking about? And he says, I've got 3 television crews that want to be there for this. And I said, you got to be kidding me. And he says, no, he said, the BBC One, Granada Media, and German television. And I said, I don't know if I can do that. He goes, you got to do it. And then somehow I managed, I said, okay, I'll do it. And I told Sandy about what was going to happen. And she said, okay, well, you're going to have to work on these extra things. And so we did that. And I met with Alan Yentob, who was the head of the BBC One. And he came to the house and, heard the music. And we spent a long time talking about it. And then on the night of the concert, I have 3 camera crews staring at me. And I when I walked down on the stage, I almost turned around and ran off, absolutely terrified. And somehow I managed to make it through. I remember going to the green room beforehand, and I looked up and I said to God and whoever was listening, I said, you are responsible for me being here. I said, don't leave me now and embarrass us both. And so I took that out on the stage and I managed to get through the music. And it was a packed house, which I was grateful for. And then from that moment on, the music kind of took on a life of its own. The current music and concertizing that I've been doing is continuing to be a lot of individual performances at what are called the IANS venues. But in addition, the music has expanded in that I have been writing more complex pieces of music. I have received music from wherever the source is in the form of symphonies and even a piano concerto for piano and orchestra. Um, I wrote the music, wrote the piano music for that, and my son, who graduated from Berklee College of Music, did the orchestration. And it was an incredible experience to have with a child, making a piece of music like that. And it was performed at the Piccolo Spoleto Festival in Charleston, South Carolina in 2011. I think that the music has continued on a course of its own, and the music continues to download into my brain. I don't know where it comes from, but it's not a new phenomenon. I remember reading Mozart and all about the great composers, and everyone had a muse or an explanation for where the music came from. Mozart was most famous for saying that the music would come to him in finished form, and he really didn't write it. He just would put it down on paper for everyone else. And interestingly enough, Brahms had a muse with the same sort of explanation, and so did Beethoven. One time somebody challenged Beethoven on the way he wrote something, and his reply was, "That's the way he gave it to me. That's exactly the way it's going to stay." And so there is a source that music comes from, and people even today say that they can somehow tune into a frequency where music exists, and I have found that to be true, and it continues to do so. One of the big questions that has haunted me ever since the lightning event is, why are we here? What is it that we're supposed to be doing that nobody has ever told us about? And I've often thought of life as being dropped onto this planet, and it's all a big board game, but there's no instructions and you have no idea how to win. I think one of the explanations that makes sense to me is that coming here into this reality gives us a chance to experience good and bad and the ugly of life and experience the lessons that come from all of those things. In the spiritual realm, there's not that contrast. There's not those catalysts that cause change and cause us to learn. And part of our spiritual existence is to learn to become a higher spiritual form. And without those challenges, I think it's a much harder proposition to do. So I think that that's the reason we keep coming back and going through it, is that if you didn't learn it the first time, then you've got to repeat the class. And I think that that's part of what we all do over and over again. And the things that change are we come as different people, different circumstances, maybe even different planets. Who knows? I've read all of those things. And The other big question is, what is love? And when I described my first exposure to the energy, what I called the God energy, the absolute love and absolute peace emanating from the source, that love is absolutely the most amazing feeling you could ever have. And I think that one of the things that we need to learn from a spiritual standpoint is how to radiate that love back. And we learn to radiate that love by loving other people, loving ourselves, and that is fed back to the source and is part of the lesson that we have to learn.